Wrestling and realistic are not words you always feel comfortable saying in the same sentence. Not that wrestling needs to be realistic or anything, unless you're a grouchy old-timer. It's important to be able to suspend your disbelief, yes, but part of the fun of wrestling is seeing incredible athletes and performers doing out-of-this-world, unbelievable things. Wrestling has changed, and the days of someone working the headlock for half an hour and a scoop slam being a finisher are long gone. Sorry, Mr. Cornette. While believability has perhaps been stretched by the way in which the business has changed and evolved, there are occasional matches that make a point to emphasize realism, even in the showbiz world of WWE. Now, nobody's going to confuse The Miz for Minoru Suzuki anytime soon, but there are certain men and women who, whether through the stiffness of their strikes, personal nature of a storyline, or the structure and stipulation of a match, can make you stop and ponder just how supposedly fake what you're seeing really is. Throughout the history of WWE, there have been a good many matches that take a much more realistic approach, and they jump out at us and live long in the memory because of it. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 most realistic WWE matches. By the way, before we get going, honorable mention to Balor vs. Dunn from NXT TakeOver Vengeance Day. What a stonker! Join us. Number 10, Bret Hart vs. Shawn Michaels at Survivor Series 1997. A match most famous for its screwy ending, yes, but the action until then was authentic and took advantage of the blurred lines between reality and fiction. The personal animosity between Bret and Shawn was well known going into the match, with the two men having a much publicised backstage brawl some months before their meeting in Montreal. Neither had been shy about shooting on the other in promos either, and it gave their WWE title match a bit of an edge, especially when it was common knowledge that the Hitman was on his way to WCW sooner rather than later. Where the duo had previously danced together beautifully, most famously in their 1-hour Iron Man match at WrestleMania 12, this promised to be more of your standard hockey fight. And that is how it shaped out, with the more cerebral and technical Hart and the more flamboyant and high-flying Michaels ditching the choreography for some wild brawling, as they fought around the arena with Sergeant Slaughter and Vince McMahon shadowing them as they went. Things continued in the same vein as the two combatants made it back into the squared circle. Everything they did was logical, the strikes were snug, and the events leading to the match made you question whether they were totally working with each other or if one or two potatoes were being thrown. The infamous ending and post-match fracas only added to the realism of it all. Number 9, Greg Valentine vs. Ron Garvin in a submission match, Royal Rumble 1990. When you think of 1990 and a picture of a blonde bloke in red and yellow, you probably don't immediately think of realistic. You're probably thinking of hot dog-skinned menace Hulk Hogan, a man whose cartoonish physique and in-ring theatrics basically changed the very nature of the business and expedited the move from wrestling to sports entertainment. While Big Terry was winning the Rumble match in the main event of that year's titular pay-per-view, two blonde blokes in red and yellow were kicking lumps out of each other earlier in the night. Rugged Ronnie Garvin and Greg the Hammer Valentine met in a submission match and engaged in a contest that was far more hard-hitting than pretty much anything else you would see on a WWE show back then. It helped that the two had a personal issue heading into it. Valentine had previously retired Garvin in the storyline and the tension had been simmering ever since, but truth be told, these were just two old school cats who would hit hard and often and apologise later. As well as the surly strikes, both men went for pinfalls during the match, playing off the fact that a submission match was an alien concept for the era and adding to the realism of it all, since it looked like they were going on instinct rather than running through a bunch of spots that required planning and cooperation. In another great moment, Hands of Stone simply stopped selling pain while locked in a hold and began pulling faces at his foe. Number 8, Chris Benoit vs. William Regal, No Mercy 2006. William Regal spent most of No Mercy 06 getting humiliated, first by falling into a hot dog cart and getting his lovely suit ruined, and then by accidentally exposing his pecker while getting out the shower. His long night got even worse when he was put into an impromptu match with a returning Chris Benoit, who was coming back after a 4-month sabbatical. These two had a long and illustrious history, having clashed in WCW, Japan, and WWE previously. Their matches were always wars, as they seemingly had carte blanche to batter each other for real, so long as it was within reason and nobody lost a limb. Really, there were multiple Benoit-Regal matches from this time period that could have been chosen for this list, but this one sticks out because A, it was on pay-per-view, and B, the rabid Wolverine chopped the real man's man in the effing face. Simply put, this was a fight, and you can't pick any holes in it. Everything is crisp and executed with a little extra piss and vinegar, especially the sickening shoot headbutts that busted both men open the hard way. A violent chess match where every move and hold was fought over with purpose, this was exhausting to watch. I can't even imagine being in the bloody thing. Number 7, Matt Riddle vs Timothy Thatcher, NXT May 27th, 2020. Don't be fooled by the Jeff Spicoli act and dumb backstage comedy. Matt Riddle is as legit as they come. A former UFC standout who enjoyed a 5-fight unbeaten streak before being unceremoniously dropped by Dana White's group, Riddle has incorporated his MMA experience and training into his pro wrestling persona. Longtime independent journeyman Timothy Thatcher was the perfect opponent for him, as he too favored a more ground-based and realistic style. The former tag partners turned enemies clashed in the original Bros NXT send-off on May 27th, 2020. This was no ordinary match, however. This was a contest that would take place inside the Fight Pit, a steel cage similar to the one seen in mixed martial arts, where the match could only be won via submission or knockout. Olympic gold medalist, WWE Hall of Famer, and certified hardman Kurt Angle was drafted in to be special guest ref. It started off with some grappling and exploratory striking before quickly being taken up a gear thanks to a cage-assisted kick that left Timothy Thatcher bloody and missing some teeth. A ringside doctor was there to check him over, again adding to the real sports feel of the presentation. The brutality continued as they eventually found themselves onto the elevated platform, the sequence ending with a beautiful floating bro off it. It wasn't enough, however, as Timothy slapped on a rear naked choke for the victory. Let me just tell you, I got a few more hairs on my chest after watching these two try to maim each other. Number 6, Brock Lesnar vs John Cena, Extreme Rules 2012. Nobody ever doubted Brock Lesnar's toughness or mean streak when he burst onto the scene in 2002. The absolutely massive former NCAA Division I heavyweight champion was, quite clearly, not somebody to be messed with, and he along with Kurt Angle were the two most legit tough guys on the roster. Fast forward a decade and there were even fewer doubts over the real fighting ability of the next big thing, as he returned to WWE after conquering UFC. Lesnar's first bout back in the scripted world of sports entertainment was an Extreme Rules match with John Cena at the pay-per-view of the same name. The match had been built with some hyper-realistic angles, such as the one where Brock smashed Big Match John in the mouth and busted him open. The Beast approached this match differently than he had matches during his first run, wrestling in MMA shorts and gloves. There was little finesse as Lesnar went for the ground and pound and cut Cena open almost instantly. You could see where the point of Brock's elbow connected with John's fire hydrant of a head, for God's sake. The doctors tried to patch him up to no avail as the Beast went into, well, beast mode, smashing Cena around the ring at will. This match would have been even more realistic had it ended with Brock eating him and hanging the carcass on his living room wall, but this was the Super Cena era, and so Lesnar ate the pin after a chain shot and AA onto the steel stairs. Number 5, Chris Jericho vs Chris Benoit in a submission match, Judgment Day 2000. Chris Benoit was one of the most intense and realistic wrestlers ever, a man who wasted no movement and dedicated his life to perfecting his craft and becoming as believable as possible. Suspension of disbelief was easy when the Crippler was in the ring, but things went up a few levels if he was matched against a Guerrero, Regal, Angle, or Jericho. The matches he had with fellow Canadian Chris were some of the saltiest of the Attitude Era, the countrymen having a mutual pact to beat the snot out of each other as if they were scrapping in Stu Hart's dungeon. Of all their classic encounters, the Intercontinental title submission match at Judgment Day 2000 was perhaps the closest to a Japanese strong-style match you could see on WWE TV. There were no countouts and no disqualifications, it was either tap out or pass out, and the tone was set from the very first lockup. Y2J and the Wolverine both threw some tasty-looking punches and kicks and chops and each tried to lock on submission holds before Benoit began working over the shoulder with surgical precision. Jericho came back and removed his opponent's knee brace before absolutely leathering him with it, then tied him up in a walls of Jericho in the ropes, which I think is how they used to punish thieves in medieval times. Number 4, Edge vs Matt Hardy, SummerSlam 2005. If one of my best mates stole my girlfriend from me while I was sitting home recovering from major surgery, I'd be more than a little miffed too. Luckily, I don't have a girlfriend, and I don't even want one, so the joke's on you. But I can certainly sympathize with Matt Hardy and the situation he found himself in with Edge and Lita. Few could blame V1 for flying off the handle and airing the dirty laundry on the internet, but WWE fired him anyway. Following fan protests, they brought him back and, looking to capitalize on the high school drama, put him straight into a program with the rated R superstar. Walking a fine line between work and shoot, tensions were quite clearly high in the build to their big grudge match at SummerSlam, with some querying whether the two could maintain professionalism in a working environment. The eventual match resembled a barroom brawl as they threw wild punches and brawled around the ringside area. Eventually, Edge got a spear through the ropes and took complete control when he dropped his rival face first onto the ring post. The resultant cut led to a referee stoppage as Hardy couldn't answer Edge's repeated kicks to the face. As a match, it was short, but it got its point across beautifully, and the way in which it was worked was realistic and reflected the personal nature of the storyline going into it. Number 3, Volta vs ILJA Dragunov, NXT UK, October 29th, 2020. Few matches generated as much buzz in 2020 as Volta vs ILJA Dragunov for the NXT UK title did. The UK subsidiary of NXT has flown under the radar a little bit, despite being chock full of talented performers. This match put the fledgling brand firmly on a lot of people's radar, however. The issue had been building for months and finally came to a head on October 29th, and the almost empty setting of the BT Sports studio somehow added to the atmosphere of what was such a brutal and mesmerizing fight. Volta had been in possession of the NXT UK title for the best part of 2 years and was firmly established as a big-time player. ILJA, on the other hand, had yet to have a true breakout performance despite being in several great matches. A barbaric masterpiece, this was a clash of two personalities and styles that complemented each other wonderfully. Neither was pulling their punches much here, or their slaps, and wrestled like it could be their last ever match. The selling, timing, and psychology was off the charts excellent, and everything seemed like a struggle in the best possible way. As well as being violent and realistic, it also told a great story, with the smaller Dragunov fighting from underneath against the much bigger Austrian anomaly. Volta retained with a choke, but neither man really came out of this contest a loser. Number 2, Eddie Guerrero vs JBL, Judgment Day 2004. Everyone involved in this match knew that they had to deliver in a big way. JBL was a new character that was not yet properly established, and if he failed to do his part here, would likely sink without a trace. Eddie Guerrero was WWE champion and needed to prove that he could get new acts over while carrying the brand on his back. To drum up interest and generate some real heat, WWE had Eddie Guerrero's mother fake a heart attack while being confronted by JBL at a house show in El Paso on Mother's Day. Yep, that'll do it. Latino heat brought the fire as he battered the Wall Street mogul from the off before JBL used his size to gain an advantage. The tide turned after the ref was bumped in a realistic, innocuous way as Eddie simply ran into him by accident, and the former acolyte blasted the champ with a sickening chair shot. Springing an absolute gusher, Guerrero looked as though he had walked out of a horror film, while JBL continued to pound away with his customarily stodgy offense. Mercifully, the match ended when Eddie got DQ'd after using the title belt as a weapon. This match felt so real because of the heavy blood loss. Guerrero had shed so much claret that he actually went into shock afterwards backstage. Number 1, Vader vs Ken Shamrock, In Your House, A Cold Day in Hell. Ken Shamrock arrived in WWE in 1997 with a reputation. Dubbed the world's most dangerous man, Shamrock had been one of the first UFC superstars, while also leaving a legacy in Japan for various MMA organizations. With a little bit of pro wrestling training and experience under his belt, WWE felt comfortable putting him in a ring with Vader for his first major outing at an In Your House pay-per-view. Considering Kenny was known for being just a tad tight with some of his strikes, Vader was an ideal opponent for him. After all, this was the mastodon that had his eye removed by Stan Hansen and yet somehow finished the bloody match. The two notorious hardnuts competed under no-holds-barred rules and put together a quasi-shoot style match where there were precisely zero niceties. At one point, Vader can be heard asking Shamrock to ease up on his kicks, and when he doesn't comply, the former WCW champion promptly takes his head off with a rugged clothesline to the side of the face. Each competitor had their own strategy, with Kenny going for the submission and Vader trying to land a knockout blow. The execution of this was top draw, and neither man held back, offering the American audience something akin to a proper shoot. Shamrock ended up winning with the ankle lock, and Vader hobbled back to the locker room on legs made of rice pudding.